Hi, my name is Bob Greenyer and I'm a volunteer with the Martin Fleischmann Memorial Project. So welcome this 15th of June 2025 to Inconvenient. How is everyone? I managed to get a power supply for my camera, so I'm back and not traveling this week, so I'm here for you. But I will be at the Cosmic Summit next week and you can use my code Tesla if you still haven't got your tickets. I will very much look forward to seeing you there. So who do we have? Hi, Stephen B. Halls. Great to see you here. Tammy, William Schwant, Mick Avila, David, Cosmic Dave. Excellent. Overwound Games. Willem Bont, a new name in the house, I think. Vanilla Isis is in the house. Mark Smith. Yes, I'm still alive. Hi, CBK. Woohoo! Hi, Joseph Collar, Scoggy Hoggins, Walter Ramjet, and David MHDS. So, very good to have you here. Okay, so last week I was sending out some bits of new material that I got from the new material that I received from Takaaki Matsumoto's family, and one of them was this video, Power from Small Suns, that I put out there. And it turns out that this particular device is reasonably close, but it's a wet cell essentially to something that I had envisaged that we will talk about moving forward, but that the way it's described in here, essentially, if we look here, it is saying the plasma stays in a small confined space. Heat and electric power can be extracted from the plasma on an as-needed basis to power any device from a small lawnmower or small water heater all the way to a large system that supplies electric power for many cities. The resulting fusion energy swirls into a spherical ball that creates its own self-holding Magneto-hydrodynamic effect in a stable shape. This is called fusion-powered ball lightning and could very well be the power of the future. And of course, the interesting point, several interesting points to this document. One is it's April 1995. Two, other than the author himself, C. Bennett and C. Bennett, there are two very conspicuous people we know of, and that is reference 3, Takaaki Matsumoto, and reference 6, which is Hal Fox, which you can read as Ken Shoulder's Exotic Vacuum Objects. Okay, and this is very up to date. This is March 1995 here, and April 1995, so this is right on the button. You can see the urgency with presenting this letter to the various people that were listed. Again, this article here, I think it's from Italians, I haven't checked that, but March 1995, so that would be Europe. This is Japan, this is from Russia, again, March 1995. So he's referencing bang up-to-date articles in this April 1995 elevator pitch that was sent to all of these people, which included the then President Bill Clinton, Al Gore's communication director, National Labs, and here are some people that I want you to see in this coming work that I'm going to present you to today. Dr. Edmund Storms, Los Alamos National Lab. Obviously, Dr. George H. Miley is the founding editor of the American Nuclear Society's fusion technology. And then there's a couple of names down here after the various journals and newspapers that I didn't recognize. I think Jim Bennett is probably C. Bennett's brother or a relative. But there was this guy called Dr. Samuel P. Faile. And so I put a pin in that, logged that random name down the bottom here, and went to look at some of the other work that was given to us. And so what I'm going to do now is I'm going to show you a document that was in the new materials. And this document is by possibly one of the world's, if not the world's best ever electrochemist. And I've mentioned his name before many times. His name is John O.M. Bockris. And if Simeon's in the house, I know he will recognize that name, John Bockris. And he is from one Texas A&M University, Department of Chemistry. And if you recall, I've mentioned him because the very, very first slide I presented, I think it was at the beginning of 2016, maybe early 2017, at the Stanford Energy Club's inaugural sort of lectures. I was talking about this work that was done by Sundaresan and Bockris, where Sundaresan was on secondment from Babratomic Research Centre in India to work with Bockris to replicate the carbon arc underwater experiment of George Osawa. And I showed the CNO kind of reaction cycle, how you can create almost every element in your body and pretty much most of the mass of the Earth using ball lightning. And that's the first time that I said that ball lightning and this Osawa reaction process was key to LENR. And it was down in the bottom left-hand corner, I referred to this replication of George Osawa's reaction producing George Osawa steel with Sundaresan. And I have, in recent years, done a recalculation of the energy of that and found that if we actually produce oxygen 17 times 4, we fusion and fission them to 12 carbon iron 56, you get carbon, which you don't detect, and you get iron 56, and the energy balance is basically the same as they observed, because they thought it was producing 4 helium and iron 56, but it was using oxygen 18. However, they never looked for 4 helium, and the energy balance is the same. So, of course, in my proposed reaction, the carbon, again, wouldn't be seen because there's already carbon in the rods. So this letter was sent to Dr. Takaaki Matsumoto by John Bockris on November the 1st, 1996, to Dr. Takaaki Matsumoto. And sadly, we have lost both John Bockris and Dr. Matsumoto. But he says, Dear Dr. Matsumoto, greetings. Thank you for entertaining my colleague Lin, who visited your laboratory in 1993. Now, I have learnt that in 1993, Matsumoto was traveling in America, and he was pulled in by some secret services or CIA or whoever. It's a little bit foggy, and interrogated. And around that time, his lab was visited or looked at, shall we say, in Hokkaido. Now, is that an event, as I was led to believe, that occurred simultaneously, or is it a misremembering? I don't know. But in this particular document, we can see that Mr. Lin did visit Matsumoto in 1993. So read into that what you will. I would hope it's just a misunderstanding and that that's what was going on rather than this simultaneous event that I've been led to believe occurred. But anyway, putting that aside, John Bockris says, I am extremely interested in your work. I have ordered for you one of my books, Bockris and Reedy, Modern Electrochemistry. I think you may find it helpful. Of course, it is largely classical, but at first one has to understand classical interpretation. For example, and all researchers should know this, I learnt it from this document. For example, normal electrolysis occurs with the application of Faraday's laws, and the amount of H2 per second is given by the total cathodic current in amps 2 times 96500, and the answer is moles per second. Okay, And he's arguing that such electrolysis is the normal kind, in quotes. The total applied potential across the cell depends on the distance between the electrodes, but will probably be about 10 volts for a current density amps centimeters to the power squared. And I'm not sure of this notation, so if someone knows what that notation is, they can let me know. Is that 0 to 1? Don't know. Anyway, now, if one makes the potential across the cell greater than 3000 volts, many things happen. A glow appears at the cathode. Dielectric breakdown occurs and streaks of light can be seen travelling at about 1/10 the speed of light from cathode to anode. And what he's referring to here is particularly this last point here, something that's akin to what Ken Shoulders quoted. That is to say that something, obviously Ken Shoulders would say it was an exotic vacuum object, would be travelling at about 1/10 the speed. That is really, really fast. And then he says this: the next thing that concerns the classical interpretation, the next thing concerns the classical interpretation of the holes on the electrode. And actually Matsumoto in pencil has circled the holes. It has been accepted. This is not to say it's true. Just because you accept something doesn't mean it's true and factual. It has been accepted for many decades that evolving H2 on iron causes holes to appear on the surface of the iron. Why? The interpretation, again, he's not, getting behind this particularly. The interpretation given hitherto is that H diffuses into the electrode and a very great internal pressure develop in voids inside the electrode. Voids near the surface spread and break out into tiny volcanoes of damaged metal on the surface. I have not seen this phenomena on platinum, but it may happen. It depends on the solubility, the local stress, the overpotential, and the diffusion coefficient of H into the metal. Now, here's the thing. We actually have one of the new papers that's being made for the remake of the book. And it is reference 59 in his book from 1996. Experiments of underwater spark discharges with pinched electrodes. Okay? And down here we can see an image of an electrode where he notes nickel cathode, left, deposits with fracture, right, tiny hole on deposits. And then he notes that there were many tiny holes, about 10 micrometers, over which the microsparks might be shining through. Okay? And later on, he notes that these structures here that bound to iron in this case, so when he used iron, there were these 10 micron roughly sized structures bound to the iron. Now, why is this interesting? Well, Bockris is suggesting that, and not getting wedded behind it, that there is a classical interpretation of holes that's been around for many decades, that evolving H2 on iron causes holes to appear. Now, he says that the assumption here is that the H diffuses into the electrode and very great internal pressure develops. Now, I can't see this happening. Nickel does not absorb hydrogen like, for instance, palladium or titanium. It just doesn't do that. Now, you could argue that the hydrogen is going within some grain boundaries, and there's clearly some cracks here that might be something to do with that, but that doesn't explain why you would have a hemispherical section cut out of the surface. And in fact, you've got a hemisphere here with another little hemisphere inside. these are not explosion craters. These are not these conical things, these volcanic eruptions. These are material where it looks like it has disappeared. Now, we have seen this before. We have seen this in the Henk-Uran 10 and 15 millimeter ball lightning cuts. We have seen it in John Hutchison. We have seen it in the cores of Lion. Actually, spherical sections taken out of diamond. The idea that the hydrogen is diffusing into the diamond crystal and then erupting and leaving a spherical hole in diamond, I don't think that's what's going on. And I think when we looked at, I went and looked at some electro-wire discharge machining. I saw scallop sections taken out of the 300 micron wire. And just over to the side of that in my 90-second SEM session, I saw a sort of brass ball, a carbon ball with a wavy line in the same kind of sacred geometry, magneto-hydrodynamic structure. I argue that what happens is the structure gets so spun up that it produces a quark gluon plasma, and the quark gluon plasma has such an intense magnetic strength and such an effect and field that it causes collapse of matter into the structure inside the non-radiating boundary. And it's normally a hemisphere. Why? Because the structure is magnetic. It doesn't go in more, it goes in as much as 50% of the structure, so it produces a hemisphere. This is why you see hemispherical tufts in the Sapphire project. But where we had a band or a wire, we actually saw actual spherical balls at the end of that band or wire. And of course, we saw it cut on the boundary of that structure when it got sufficiently spun up. So I think that the intuition of John Bockris here back in 1996, that maybe it isn't all what people have suggested it to be, his non-committal to the belief that it is because hydrogen is diffusing into the metal and causing an eruption. I think he was right on the money to suspect that, and I think Dr. Matsumoto's highlighting of this is also very, very important. And it's interesting because as I'm looking at this, I'm seeing hexagonal structures in here, regularly spaced with a spot in the middle. But you know, maybe that's just my eyes doing what my eyes do. Anyway, yeah, I'm seeing an array of them, in fact. But anyway, and in fact, that's a pentagonal hole there as well. Okay, all right. Moving on. Crystals do often form these kind of structures as well. So what we know is nickel does not tend to absorb hydrogen. Of course, if this is the anode, then you would expect hydrogen to want to be coming in. However, because hydrogen is positive, and if it was a cathode, you would expect the hydrogen to be coming in because it's positive, the H plus or whatever, and the proton is trying to come in. So maybe that is the case, but we know that nickel really does not like to absorb hydrogen. It tends to just adsorb it on the surface. And if that's the case, you've got a lot of electrons coming out and you've got a lot of protons coming in. That is a ripe environment for producing a cluster, and the cluster will become magneto-hydrodynamic, and we're going to look at that in a little while. So he then goes on to say, so now I come to my question to you. When you do your experiments in which you say sparks can be seen, what is roughly the potential between the electrodes? Are your electrodes both platinum? What is the distance between them? Okay, so clearly they're not both platinum. And what you can see here is, I'm going to show you this particular video here on this page. And this again was in 1996. And he's saying that over 40 volts, the surface of the electrode was pinched so that sparking appeared on the cathode or anode. and simultaneously extraordinary phenomena were observed, especially microscopic ring clusters generated on the cathode caused by tiny ball lightning-like phenomena. Over 60 volts current suppression as pinch effect served to suppress the gas evolution. Okay, so this is the video from 1996 or the early 1990s. This is a frame taken from there, and I'm going to start playing the video now so you can see what happens. So he's moving the voltage up from 0 towards 40. And then when you get to 40 volts, you start to see sparking on the end here. So when you start to see 40 volts there, you'll start to see the sparking. Okay, it's going a little bit mental with the evolution of gas here. And then suddenly you can see a little bit of glowing going on. Not quite now. He's going to get to 40 volts shortly. There we go. We've got a little bit of glowing going on here. And then as he gets up to 60 volts and 70 volts, he says the pinch effect, which is the same as that Chinese author that I referred to, where they actually drew a kind of galaxy on the end, and he's saying it produces a torsion field in the vacuum. It changes mode, and it starts to do a lot of sparking. When it's doing a lot of sparking, it starts to do a lot of sparking now. There you go. It's switched modes, and then he turns off the light to see what happens. He's going to turn off the light in a minute. And really, this kind of approach by using a microscope objective with a video camera is something that I would like to do, because I would like to capture this in beautiful res, in absurd resolution. I would like to see this in absurd resolution. Okay? So he's turned off the light now, so you can see it was very different when it went into what he calls this pinch mode. And bearing in mind this kind of pinch effect was quoted by this Chinese research team 2 months after Martin Fleischmann and Stanley Pons published their data in March 1989. Yeah, there's going to be detailed description, yes. Okay, so now the interesting thing is I've just taken one of the frames from this video, and you can see the edge of the metal, and it's literally like a nuclear bomb. It's like a mushroom cloud coming out. And you know what that means? You know that that means it is a magneto-hydrodynamic structure. You know that that means it is a magneto-hydrodynamic structure. So here, from around 30 years ago, Matsumoto's work is showing you that this is a magneto-hydrodynamic structure. Okay? That is the genius of this man, to work in this way. Okay. So I think you get the idea, and he goes on like that for a while, and then he turns down the voltage and things go a little bit messy. And you can see he kind of ends up down here. That's that. Right. So, back to our Mr. Bockris here. We go back, well, we'll actually go to Matsumoto's paper. So in Matsumoto's paper, he shows, actually, that up here, this is the kind of apparatus, extremely well defined, not complicated. He used electrodes of metal wire, nickel, palladium, titanium, iron, cadmium, molybdenum and tungsten in the range of 0.5 to 2 millimeters diameter. He had some nuclear emulsions here to see the funny things coming off. That's the power supply, and he had a cesium iodide scintillator detector. Okay. The sparking that appeared on the surface of the electrode over 40 volts was observed by a system of micro-telescope and videotape recorder. This is the genius of which he applied. The emission of radiation was monitored by a spectroscopy with a cesium iodide thallium scintillation detector. Furthermore, nuclear emulsions were located near to the cathode. Okay, so here he goes. In the higher voltage region, about 60 volts, the pinch effect of the current effectively worked to suppress the gas evolution, and tiny sparks appeared on the surface of the cathode. They initially appeared on the bottom tip, which is what you saw of the cathode, and as the voltage increased, the number of the tiny sparks increased to eventually cover the whole surface of the cathode. Here, the current was strongly suppressed to a stable level of about 0.1 of an amp. The current voltage curve somewhat depended on the condition of the electrodes. Figure 2 was obtained with new nickel electrodes. With old electrodes, impurity deposits on the surface, such as the electrolyte of potassium, somewhat changed the IV curve. However, general aspects of the IV curve showing 3 divided regions was maintained through the experiment. So basically this is the curve. You get increasing current from like below 0.5 of an amp, or I presume 0, and you go all the way up to sort of 1.25 amps, and then it starts to change mode and the pinch effect takes over, and it comes down to around about, well, this is down to as little as 0.1 of an amp here. Down here is what he's talking about. And so this is 50, 60, 70 volts. So around about 70 volts, depending on the experiments. Sometimes you can get it down to 0.5 of an amp. And that's when the interesting sparks go on. So this kind of answers the question of John Bockris here. And he talks about the electrodes he used. I don't think in these experiments he used platinum. No, just nickel, palladium, titanium, iron, cadmium, molybdenum, and tungsten. Okay, right. So, why do you think some nuclear event is occurring? Do you see new transmuted elements? If so, which ones? Well, if you go along further into the paper, you can see some of the frames here. Down here, this is absolutely incredible. In this particular shot, he says there was a shock and the glowing balls of light came away from the electrode and traveled towards the anode. Okay? And he argues here, due to mechanical shock from the explosion, a group of tiny sparks were separated from the cathode and were driven by the electrical potential towards the anode, as shown in figure 4b. The tiny sparks were decayed on the anode to trigger the second explosion, as shown in figure 4c. These pictures showed that tiny sparks were negatively charged and could exist in water solution as independent bodies. Okay, so this little observation, which I'm sure that if people replicated this work would find themselves from time to time, that a shock caused the tiny sparks, which were self-contained little orbs, to travel from the cathode towards the anode, where they interacted with the anode, and I'm sure the oxygen collecting at the anode interacted with the hydrogen that's being carried by these structures and caused the second shock wave. But that showed that both that they could be stable and transported in through the fluid as a plasma. So that's a plasma in water. That means it must have what Axel would call a domain wall, or what I would call a non-radiating boundary, or an event horizon, in which there is a plasma that's able to maintain itself as a plasma of some kind. Maybe it's quark gluon plasma, and that is able to emit light and travel towards the anode, which he determined quite correctly would mean that the overall structure is negatively charged. Now, if we were to understand this as Ken Shoulder's exotic vacuum objects, that would mean that that structure at least has a single negative charge, and it's moving in that direction. Of course, Ken Shoulder says it can have billions of charges, but it can be anywhere from a billion negative charges all the way down to one negative charge. Either way, negative. Okay, so, and then that further down here, he talks about the radiation, the fact that it's actually the signals were generated by electromagnetic waves picked up by the electrical circuit. The emission of the electromagnetic waves will be discussed relating to the breakup of itonic clusters. That should say itonic, not ironic, of course. So this is background, that's the signal. This is at 70 volts and 55 volts. So the signal is vastly higher here at 70 volts. And he's saying that this is like electromagnetic waves created by, one might assume, the actual ball lightning and their breakup. Okay? So did he see any transmutation? Well, he argues here that there was transmutation, and he shows it here, and that there is elements in there that weren't there to begin with. And so he's answering the question of John Bockris here. So you can see that there was a kind of collegiate process going on. Maybe I can find where it discusses the transmutation. Does it discuss it there? The analysis with EDX, in which no lighter elements than sodium could be analysed, indicates that only potassium was found in... Oh, this is string products. So it's potassium bearing electrolyte, and it produced these string products, which we can now see in beautiful resolution. They are hollow hexagonal tubes and pure potassium, but it couldn't see below oxygen. Sorry, below sodium, so it could be a compound. But it was collecting potassium from the environment and depositing these crystal tubes out, I would say, out of the back of a structure as it collapsed. Okay, so, and at some point here he does talk about transmutation and what he observed. That's 10, okay. Okay, so besides iron from the host metal and potassium from the electrolyte, some elements of calcium, of course we see calcium, sodium, chlorine and cadmium were both observed in the ring and hexagonal products. So there you go. In an iron and potassium based experiment, he observed calcium, sodium, chlorine and cadmium. Two circular zones especially could be seen for cadmium that were clearly separated from each other in the ring products, as shown in figure 10. So here you go. He's showing here that this is cadmium, and you can see that cadmium is absolutely, definitely on the outside of the structure here. Okay, so if you can imagine that this is a torus, and we can see these things up here, it's like a torus. The cadmium is on the skin of the torus. Okay, we saw this in a toroidal cluster that hit near the 15mm ball lightning hole in the work of Henk Uren in a Vega experiment, and it had a very, very thin pure copper inside, and then it had iron on the outside. So that was that. And does he talk about any transmutation further on? I think he might discuss how he thinks they might be getting there. Nuclear transmutation. The nuclear transmutation took place during the underwater spark discharges. The nuclear transmutation can take place in what he calls itonic hydrogen clusters. Here, the hydrogens were so highly compressed that various kinds of nuclear transmutation became possible. The feasible schemes of nuclear transmutation are desirable in appendix for the case iron electrodes and the potassium electrolyte. Furthermore, the analysis with EPMA showed that nuclear transmutation was possible in the ring cluster. This fact suggests that there might be another process for nuclear transmutation, different from the nuclear transmutation in the atonic hydrogen clusters. So he's opening the door here to something that's occurring in a different way through a toroidal ring cluster. The ring cluster shows crystallization effect should have higher concentration of atoms than solid state. There we go. So he's saying the ring cluster has somehow condensed ordinary atoms into a higher density. And the way he's done that is by saying that this ring cluster over a 2-day period decays through an intermediary structure here to these clusters. So therefore he's saying that it's a higher density of atoms in those structures than normal molar density for the atoms involved. And I think he's got a table somewhere. Maybe he doesn't. Okay, all right. Is it an appendix? Oh yeah, so he's got the reaction here, appendix. So he's saying that on the iron electrode, manganese here is coming from effectively electron capture. And then through that goes to chromium that way. Iron plus proton goes to cobalt. This goes to iron 56, and then that goes to manganese. He's got some reactions here. 2 irons go to tellurium. That goes to antimony. That goes to tin. That goes to indium, and that ends up at cadmium. Okay. And it's interesting, he should see these radiation signals, maybe with a positron maybe, but not the electron capture. And he got cadmium here, different isotope. He's got tin here. Potassium to calcium, we all know and love. Another one, different isotope of calcium, and here. So he suggested how the transmutations occur. So yes, he's in detail answering these questions, and I don't know when this particularly happened, because this particular paper is, where is it? It's in 1996, but where? I don't know. It's in the Journal of New Energy. Okay. So he awaits your response with great interest. So I suspect that this paper was in response to John O.M. Bockris, quite possibly the world's greatest ever electrochemist. Okay. Now, the next item on the list is some other papers and discussion points that John sent Dr. Takaaki Matsumoto. And the first one reveals something very, very inconvenient and almost a little bit shocking. Again, it is a faxed document that was sent to John Bockris at some point. I don't know exactly when. This is the fact. It's missing something from the top here. It's just the scanner that I was using. It says, use this at your own risk, no liability. This information is being sent out free of charge to encourage the development of new energy for peaceful applications. Export of this information is prohibited unless you obtain an ECCN number from the Department of Commerce, such as that. Oh well. It's called a-neutronic hot fusion fission. A-neutronic hot fusion fission. 15-centimeter wide fireball produced using tinned copper wire by SP Faile, October the 22nd, 1996. Hold on a cotton picking minute. Hold on a cotton picking minute. Is that the SP Faile we see here? Dr. Samuel P. Faile, that was on this distribution list alongside President Bill Clinton and the directors of Lawrence Livermore, Los Alamos Joint Propulsion Laboratory, and NASA, Arthur C. Clarke, Edmund Storms, George Miley, and all of these folks. Well, what about it? It's described here. A power supply of 3,400 volts, roughly 90 microamps, was used for 30 minutes to partially charge up a capacitive system of 42 microfarads, I think that says. If it is, it's, anyway. A 16-foot long short wire, 18 gauge insulated wire, was used with a section having 1 inch long number 44 tinned copper wire rather than number 18 copper wire. Okay, so this is what you need to do. Upon shorting out the capacitive system, so this is a wire discharge. It was the resistive 1 inch long fine wire section that a white 15 centimeter wide fireball originated. So fireball is a euphemism for ball lightning, producing a very loud metallic whack noise. At a distance of about 5 feet, the brilliant fireball left spots in the front of the eyes for about half an hour. Half an hour. Other than that, I believe I was out of range for nuclear biological something. Studies by Marita indicate ionizing radiation out to about a meter. So far, the Geiger counter studies indicate that all the radiation is prompt rather than lingering radioactivity. Okay, so this is in line with the kind of thing that you get from ball lightning and also from unidentified flying objects that almost certainly are using this technology. Hints of transmutation products have been found in Nicholas Reiter's EDS-SEM studies for another lead-iron wire. It is believed a relatively clean nuclear event was involved which might exceed the input power by a factor of 5. By a factor of 5. If this process is harnessed, the shielding should be less than for conventional nuclear power. Background articles by SPF and NR are in New Energy News, so you can find these. They are in the open field. So this is a remotely operated short fireboil with tin copper wire vaporized. Okay. Now this is in line with my observation of the late Neil Crichton Gould's spark gap communication device, which we determined from the cotton thread used for insulation was in the late 1800s. And the scanning electron microscopes on that showed that, I think it's something like a Rumikoff coil or something like that, the sparks generated from that had, it would appear, caused transmutation, which would make it the earliest exotic vacuum object spark transmutation ever observed. But exploding wires are known to produce transmutation. I refer you to the work of Leonid Aritsyev, and it produces ball lightning that decays into micro ball lightning. It produces topological monopoles that are observed in IM57. It produces comet-like trails, strange radiation, all of the spectral lines and so forth, so and actual observed transmutation. So exploding wire does produce transmutation, and in this case, just like in the case of the work, so there's the fine wire, that's the fine wire there, just like in the case of Leonid Aritsyev, you get a ball lightning formed. So in actuality, this work here is neither original nor unique, although it predates the work of Leonid Aritsyev. It predates the work of Leonid Aritsyev, which means that both Leonid Aritsyev, well, Ken Shoulders probably, maybe, I don't know who this was distributed to, because this is obviously being sent to John Bockris, and John Bockris sent it to Takaaki Matsumoto, and we can say with certainty that Dr. Samuel P. Faile was also a colleague or contact of Warren Cooley and Chuck or Charles Bennett. Okay, so all of these people were communicating, it would seem, at this time. So there we go. We've got a confirmation, or rather a predating work, and this is at least 5 years. It's much more than at least 5 years and a quarter, but as much as 6 years before Leonid Aritskyev's exploding wire system produced it ball lightning. And you can imagine this sort of thing happening in nature. For instance, you have a lightning strike hit, say, some electricity cables, and part of the electricity cable vaporizes and produces a ball lightning. Okay, so what else does he have in this document, which is very interesting because it shows the thinking back in 1996 of one of the leading cold fusion experimentalists out there, and one of the leading electrochemists, and Martin Fleischmann and John Bockris had a deep relationship that one studied under the other. So, speculative interpretation of over-unity experiments involving water electrolysis. Wow, John Bockris. The background to this paper is a number of papers reporting low temperature nuclear reactions outside the system of PDD. Boom! Yes, my man, John Bockris. Yes. Yes. These experiments up to June, and this is water electrolysis, up to June 1996, have been summarized in the review by Bockris, Lin, and Bush. So Lin would be the colleague that went in 1993 to Matsumoto's lab. Okay? A brief description of certain phenomena by Steri and Zorzi is the earliest origin of suggestions made here. They sparked gasoline-air mixtures of unusual ratios. And recorded more heat being produced from such actions than could be justified in terms of thermochemistry. It was suggested that the origin of the heat arises from natural deuterium within the gasoline and hydrogen present, among possible reactions being DD to 4 helium or D plus H to helium-3. Experiments with Brown's gas, circulated, my friends, by Dr. Takaaki Matsumoto. For some years, Yul Brown has been describing the special properties of Brown's gas. At first, this gas was regarded merely as a result of electrolysis of water. The only difference from this vulnerable process was Brown mixed the hydrogen and oxygen together, i.e. in stoichiometric ratio, in plastic tubes and maintained them without contact with a metal, so that when he introduced the mixture into a cylinder of an internal combustion engine, they burned hotter than the normal hydrogen-oxygen flame in air because of the volumetric ratio for optimal combination and the absence of dilution with nitrogen. Okay, that's the argument. However, as Brown's experiments have progressed, particularly those done at Batu Institute in Peking, Brown has proposed the use of a number of novel solutions, some containing D2O. Okay. In a communication of 1995 to the author, so the author, which author? This author? Which author? Which author are we talking about? Three, is it a private communication to John Bockris? Wow. Yul Brown was privately communicating to the world's greatest electrochemist. Wow. Brown stated that the flame given by burning gases from an electrolysis of his mixture reached a temperature far above 2000 degrees centigrade. I'm not sure that's true, and I think we showed that. But it seems to have the ability to do things that would require that temperature. Easily melted tungsten. I don't think it was easily melting tungsten. It was fragmenting tungsten and turning it into a vapor. That's what we found with a Marsa gas. The normal temperature of H2 and O2 flame is about 2000 Kelvin. Okay, so it's not possible, but as we showed, there seemed to be transmutation going on. Brown stated in this personal communication that tritium was found in the water collected from combustion. Very interesting. When he's using D2O. Interesting. That means it is somehow adding a proton with an electron and an antineutrino into that deuterium to make tritium. This suggests nuclear origin for the elevated temperature. No attempt to find helium was made. Well, I don't think it necessarily is what you would call traditional nuclear, but that's my view. Oh, hello. We've got Stanley Meyer here. Yes. It's flux compression. Many patents have been received by Meyer. 4. Who's received the patent? A. Griffin, water as fuel, the impact of new technologies in the marine industry, Southampton Institute, Warsh. Okay, all right. That's a different patent. Okay, might have to look at that. He claims to be in possession of an above-unity process. The Meyer process works by applying DC pulses to the electrode of a device aimed at decomposing water, no ions added. The peaks of voltage pulse reach 3000 volts. Here we go, 3000 volts. The hydrogen produced in such processes stated by Malove, that's Jean Malove, and again, this is in an article, I guess, in number 5 down here. This is a private communication with John Bockris. So you're uncovering a lot of hidden truths here, or at least hidden suspicions. observation of one demonstration to about 6 times that calculated by Faraday's laws. So the hydrogen produced in such process is stated by Malov to be, so the Faraday's laws is what he was referring to here. You should have a very, very specific amount of moles per second produced with a certain amount of current. And what he is stating here is that this is up to 6 times the amount calculated by Faraday's laws. And I believe and have argued that, and this tells you here, 3,000 volt pulses. So what I would argue is that 3,000 volt pulse causes dissociation of the hydrogen and oxygen. It causes extreme impulse related hydrodynamic shear, which causes magneto-hydrodynamics with that charged plasma, that charge separated plasma. That leads to the kind of thing we actually have observed and have repeatedly shown the elemental transmutations for in a very wide range of analysis techniques, and we've physically shown the actual structures that are doing the work on the copper pipes of Benjamin Huang. 100% certainly, in my view, this will be causing a magnetic topological monopole. This will be depleting the vacuum energy between it and the non-radiating boundary in the tornado that comes in, and that will cause water molecules to separate from each other and then to separate into hydrogen and oxygen. I would argue that this is a complete and full explanation for Stanley Meyer's device. It is, however, difficult to calculate the latter quantity because of the pulse-like nature, of course, of the electrolysis. Thus, during pulsing, much of the current will be used up capacitively. This is calculated from this, where C is the double layer capacitance, V is the voltage, and T the time. On the other hand, such current neglected by Malov would subtract rather than add to the current being counted by the Faraday calculation. The anomaly is therefore increased, thereby increased. Ooh. Now look, it's like we're watching the list of the sadly departed geniuses. We have John Bockris, sadly departed. Dr. Takaaki Matsumoto, sadly departed. We have possibly, I don't know, but I don't see anything published on, and you're going to see in a minute, after 2006, I think it was, for Faile. Down here, Yul Brown, sadly departed. Down here we have Meyer, sadly not with us. Did he succumb to some nefarious action? Was it inconvenient for this information to be known? And of course, Malov, oh God, a little bit inconvenient, Malov. Yeah, some kind of passing going on there. So according to experiments described by Scherzelik and Bockris in 1987, when voltages of more than around 1000 are applied to an electrode in pure water, the electrode surface begins to glow and emits white radiation. White radiation. This is Bockris in 1987. This is 2 years before Pons and Fleischmann came out. White radiation? That would be higher than you would generally expect. The white radiation might be UV, it might be soft X-rays. Dielectric breakdown of the water occurs and streamers pass between the cathode and the anode. Such streamers have been shown to travel at up to 1/10 the speed of light. Now he's referencing 7. 7. What is 7? 7 is, wow. E.O. Foster, IEEE, Transactions of Electrical Insulation, 1985. So from 1985 to 1987, this is what they're saying. So the streamer is traveling at 1/10 the speed of light. What does also travel at the speed of light, 1/10 the speed of light regularly? Well, my friends, that would be an exotic vacuum object. An exotic vacuum object. And of course, 1987 here is the year in which Ken Shoulders published his book, EV, A Tale of Discovery. Let it now be supposed as a hypothesis that the very high local temperatures on the electrode surface triggers a nuclear reaction between naturally occurring deuterium atoms arising from the thermally caused dissociation of water. I'm pretty sure that yes, there's thermal dissociation of water, but I'm arguing that the magneto-hydrodynamics does something a lot more interesting. But anyway, the heat arising from such a possible formulation of helium could lead to thermal dissociation of water and in the vicinity of the electrode. So remember, when he was doing his work with Sundaresan and Bockris, replicating the George Osler reaction carbon arc underwater, he assumed that helium was the thing doing the work. Okay? He's assuming in all of these things, it's the fusion of deuteriums to helium that is doing the work. I argue that it's actually hydrogen, oxygen 16 making oxygen 17, and the oxygen 17 then fusing and fissioning, not necessarily, but that produces a very large amount of energy as observed in the work with Bin-Juan Huang. This occurs in cavitation and it occurs in electrolysis systems driven at the limit. Surface and thus an excess of gas is formed by Faradaic electrolysis. Some recombination would occur, but it may be incomplete and chemically high temperatures involved. Then, when the resulting H2 is combined with oxygen air, the heat evolved is greater than expected from recombination of hydrogen and oxygen calculated on the assumption that H2 rose in the amount calculated by. So basically, I mean, he might be right. John Bockris might be right here. And the way you would test that is to try some deuterated water of a higher concentration than normal water and see if you massively increase the amount of gas evolved. If you didn't, then it wasn't down to the deuterium fusing to helium. I don't know. So it could be this way, but I suspect it might be a different way. Here we go. Aquafuel. A process was recently patented by Richardson, which involves electrolysis between two carbon electrodes in distilled water. Oh, electrolysis between two carbon electrodes in water? The applied potential is about 3,000 volts. Interesting. It's about the same as Meyer's experiments, and it's about the same as John Bockris's experiments. Interesting. The carbon is used up, forming largely carbon monoxide, but the hydrogen which is evolved is above that expected from Faraday's laws. Okay. The interpretation similar to that for Meyer experiments is suggested. The high applied voltage would bring about conditions similar to those observed by these guys, including Bockris. The speculation is that nuclear reaction occurs between the naturally present deuterium to form helium, and the heat of the reaction causes the dissociation of water, which would give rise to excess hydrogen. Well, Matsumoto was observing clearly other forms of nuclear reaction which tend to involve, according to his calculations, either an electron going in, which is going to be a weak interaction, or a proton going in, which can be a weak interaction if you have made that into a neutron by having an antineutrino and an electron and a proton making a neutron. But he's actually going to cobalt here, iron to cobalt. Yeah, so that's actually progressing. So that is actually a proton going in. Here he's got ions fusing. This is definitely not what is being said by Bockris. Again, this is an electron going in, proton going in. Okay, so at no point is Matsumoto suggesting that any of his observed transmutations is anything to do with formation of helium. And I would agree. Water explosions observed by Grenou and Grenou. Okay, now Grenou and Grenou's work was studied by George Hathaway. I saw his equipment. So George Hathaway also helped John Hutchison greatly, and his colleague Pizarro worked with him, that is, worked with John Hutchison for a while. So you can start to see how all these things are kind of connected. Okay, he says high in a chemical sense, that's the high temperature, but only about 0.1% of the temperature range associated classically with fusion. Okay, these workers have reported underwater explosions arising from apparatus in which two electrodes form an arc within water. So you can see where Matsumoto is circling. He even circled his own name here. Scintillation and Bockris. They have photographed a large area of plasma with the emission of strong white radiation. Okay, so that's Bockris's observation. One may refer here to observations published by Matsumoto. 10. Which one are we looking at? Which one are we looking at? 10. Proceedings of the International Conference on Cold Fusion, 1995. Okay, so it's definitely not the 1996 document we were looking at earlier. Of cavities formed on the surface of electrodes undergoing electrolysis. Matsumoto claims these holes to be the sites of micronuclear explosions. I would argue they might be, but I would suggest they're actually matter collapse within a non-radiating boundary. A similar explanation has been given by George and Stringham. Oh, hello a minute. George? Would that be Russ George? I think that would be Russ George. 11. George. George, infinite energy. Would that be the same Russ George that we found in the classified document where they were working together? I think it would be. So in this document here, when you go into it, you can see that electrodynamics of cold fusion here. You can see here somewhere, where is it? We recently ran an experiment at eQuest in Palo Alto, California with the help of Russ George. Deuterated fullerene was placed in a plasma glow discharge tube. In this apparatus, the deuterated fullerene was injected into an evacuated glass tube with electrodes at both ends. Russ George. Okay. So we have Russ George, and this is Roger Stringham. He's an expert in cavitation. In interpreting the micro pits and damages they find in palladium electrodes after their sono-illumination, sono-fusion, George and Stringham report that the edge of these craters are populated by new elements, i.e. the transmutation of palladium has occurred. Okay, that's their view. Thus, the carbon electrode surfaces which originate the arc which the granules use is evidently the site of micro-explosions, and a sufficient number of these provide sufficient heat to cause what is seen as an explosion in the water adjacent to the electrodes. Alternatively, the streamers, electron streamers, which pass between the cathode and the anode during dielectric breakdown phenomena in water, may give rise to nuclear action according to schemes developed by Shoulders and Fox. Isn't it interesting here? Possibly, I would argue, the world's greatest electrochemist is arguing for recognition of Stanley Meyer, of Yul Brown, of Dr. Matsumoto, of Peter Granoux and Granoux, and of Ken Shoulders. Like the people that I never hear discussed in the cold fusion conferences until I started mentioning, well, at least the Matsumoto and Ken Shoulders. Until I brought in Roy Shinamaza. What is going on? What is going on? Now, the more I read this paper, and I'm reading it for the first time with you guys, the more I read this paper, the more it reminds me of my presentation, basically is HHO and instant Lena, because I argued in that presentation in 2022, I think it was, that I gave in Assisi, in Italy, that essentially it would appear to me that most Lena reactions are actually just HHO. Let me see if I can find it. Anyway, you can go and see it. It's on my blog somewhere. But anyway, I argued that, in my view, most Lennard reactions were actually HHO. And that's kind of what we're getting to with what is being argued here by this electrochemist, to be fair. To be fair. Correa's over-unity discharge tubes. The Correas have patented processes in which discharge currents pass between electrodes in gas discharge tubes as a result of the application of certain electrical pulse regime. An over-unity emission of heat is observed. The electrodes are partly used up. This is the problem. These experiments resemble experiments carried out in electrochemical cells, i.e. they consist of electrolysis of gases, insofar as nuclear reactions have been observed to occur at some electrodes sparked in the presence of O2. It is reasonable to suggest that they may occur here too. However, insufficient information is available to allow suggestion as to their identity. However, Karabut, Kirchhoff, and Samatimova, he spelt that wrong. That's why I can't say it. It's Samatimova. Oh God, now I can't say, he's got me wrong. Anyway, excuse me. Observe nuclear heat as a result of sparking palladium electrode and D2 gas. Possible eventual development into energy sources. The suggestions given here are partly speculative. They rest upon poorly defined facts and use extremely novel theory not yet accepted by the nuclear community. See, however, Kim and Zubarev. However, the number of positive reports on the existence of low-temperature nuclear reactions in solids is now too great for there to be doubt as to their existence. One can make speculative suggestion of an application of an eventual engineered version of these devices. One begins with the trigger energy, W, and by this energy electrolyzes water under the over-unity circumstances corresponding to some of the above experiments. The watt joules of energy entered into one of the electrolysis devices produces, say, 2 watts in respect to the energy equivalent of the hydrogen which they produce, calculated in terms of the normal chemical, blah, blah, blah. The hydrogen is then converted to electricity in a fuel cell. After counting the losses, say half watts is used in over-unity electrolysis device to form, say, 3 watts in a hydrogen energy. So he's proposing using one of these techniques to produce hydrogen oxygen and using a fuel cell once you've extracted the hydrogen, I guess, to see how much energy you get out in terms of electrical energy. The process continues by electrolysis and fuel cell, and one can begin to remove some of the excess electricity to be applied to outside circuitry, eventually to act as an energy source. These remarks may be applied to futuristic concepts of organization of states in which the computer-directed and automated factory has reached an asymptotic state of development. Thus, within a few generations, perhaps no more than one, most of our means of production will have little need for employment of people. This is interesting. The needed energy and goods could be available if there is sufficient free energy supplied to automated systems. A high degree of recycling would be necessary. Thus, Bockris and Dandapani have shown that average personal income in countries related to the average energy per person available by integral of shaped curve, 10 kilowatts levelized per person would bring an affluent, work-free, post-industrialized society to the whole planet. Though a population increase would have to be organized. Okay, really? Okay, so there's your references. We have more Bockris here. We have Bockris. So Sundaresan and Bockris. That's one that I was referring to. Yong-E Kim. Interesting. Yong-E Kim is there. Karabut, Kirchhoff, Savatimova. Saratimova. He spelt it twice wrong. It should be Savatimova. Correa and Ken Shoulders. There we go. Infinite Energy 2. Is that the copy I have over here? Is that the copy I have here? Oh no. This is Infinite Energy 11. Of course, Infinite Energy, I think Arthur C. Clarke, along with Gene Mallow, were some of the founders. And in fact, in this article, it's Charge Clusters in Action, you can see here. It has an article on here saying, Remembering Eugene Mallow. God bless his soul. Okay. All right, so What I basically said there is that in this document we have yet another example of hidden effects observed years before Leonid Uritskev observed them. Personal communications, a guiding principle by which people can know whether their device is producing over unity, this maximum that you can produce here of hydrogen, a means by which you can do a test at the end there, and obviously he's fixated here on deuterium. But what I sense is that maybe Matsumoto sent this in response to this paper or email or letter, and it came out there. But anyway, we have got a lot of inconvenient people here. We've got inconvenient observations, inconvenient Brown's gas, inconvenient Stanley Meyer. We've got inconvenient aquafuel. We've got inconvenient Ken Shoulders, inconvenient Matsumoto. And when I mean that, like, I absolutely loved putting on the presentation and exhibition of some of Matsumoto's work in Japan. Sho very excitedly came up to me and said, "Kasagi knew Matsumoto, you should go and speak to him." And this was at dinner. I went breakfast one of the mornings, and I went over and sat down and said, "Oh, did you know Matsumoto?" He said, "Oh, yeah, he had a silly idea for how things worked." And I was absolutely shocked, absolutely shocked. So it was no surprise to me that despite the exhibition room being between the main conference hall and the toilets for the main conference, you had to walk past our exhibition room in the breaks. Basically no Japanese came in Japan. Basically no Japanese came in. So it's not a surprise that in Japan they don't want to talk about Ken Shoulders. They don't want to talk about whether an electrolysis process by Korea, an electrolysis process by Grano and Grano, and aquafuel, and by Stanley Meyer, and by Brown's gas, and by John Bockris and his colleagues himself, whether they are actually a path to producing over unity energy. Yeah. So, there we go. So there's me thinking under a delusion that I was being original when I said basically HHO was like instant Lena. That I was a full, 2022, 12, 2, I was a full 26 years behind John Bockris. 26 years behind John Bockris. To the to the credit of the Martin Fleischmann Memorial Project, we have got a lot of evidence. A lot of evidence now. Okay. All right, that isn't where I wanted to completely go with this today. We've got some really interesting things to share with you. And so, my good friend, Paul, did some investigation into one SP Faile, and he came up with a very, very interesting document. And it's actually written by the person that is actually quoted by, thank you very much, Skoggy Hoggins, that's very kind of you. It's quoted by in the article that we've just read from John Bockris. Right. See how these are all connected. It's called, and this is going to freak you out a little. Maybe not, maybe. It freaked me out a little. This is called, so thank you to Paul Harris for finding some information about SP Faile. SP Faile here was a doctor at Pennsylvania State University. And you can see here the last article I can see was in June 2006. Okay, June 2006. And yeah. Okay. So I don't know whether he is still with us, but check out this document. Observations of anomalous transparency. In 1987 and early 1998, Dr. S.P. Faile, a semi-retired materials research engineer and scientist, began recording observations of a curious effect witnessed by him around his home. The effect seemed to consist of occasional circumstances where common, normally opaque objects ranging from one's forearm to sheet metal to furniture would appear to turn partially transparent. More distant objects seem to be visible through these structures, even to the extent of such details as printed characters. The effect was first noticed by S.P. Faile in dimly lit workroom conditions, where he has been conducting experiments in new energy for several years. So it first occurred in rooms where he was conducting experiments. What experiments was he conducting, friends? He was conducting exploding metal wire experiments producing long-lived luminous plasmoids aka ball lightning. Dr. Faile at first, in scientific fashion, evaluated whether or not the transparency effect was a specialized optical illusion. He began to doubt that this was the case. However, after many hours of painstaking viewing and after receiving the cooperation of several other associates located away from his hometown of Cincinnati, at present it seems to be a phenomenon in search of a definition or methodology. One model would place the effect into the realm of anomalous human talent, such as clairvoyance or remote viewing. Hello. However, because other individuals with only a minimum of technique description have been able to confirm the effect, and because a number of real-world factors such as lighting, location, and certain material structures can greatly affect its magnitude, it seems to more properly belong in the realm of optics and may invoke quantum principles. You know what this is starting to sound like? It's starting to sound like cloaking. You know, it's starting to sound a little bit like the light is bending around an object and the object is maybe capturing something from the environment, or that the environment has been conditioned into a way that normal matter is not as opaque as it normally should be, that photons can travel through, that they are tunneling through the ordinary matter. That would be a quantum principle. Qualities of the Faile effect. The observation of anomalous transparency seems to be possible in a very wide range of environments. The first hints of the effect were noticed in low-level diffused monochromatic light indoors. SPF would observe his right forearm whilst moving solid metallic objects such as screwdrivers or steel rods behind it with the left hand. With proper dim lighting and the focusing of eyes to a point in space beyond the right arm, the basic moving outline of the selected metal piece could be seen through the arm. An illusion where the mind fills in suspected detail? If observations would have remained at this parlor trick level, the argument might hold more merit. However, SPF was eventually able to view details of objects completely obscured by the arm or larger structures. Transparency viewing was then moved outdoors, with surprising results. Once again, Dr. Faile repeatedly witnessed the virtual transparency effect. However, new examples could be found with walls, boulders, fences, and tree limbs. We should note at this point that the effect described is not the old children's pastime of holding one's fingers out and defocusing the eyes, thus allowing a transparent double image to form. Technical correspondents and associates of Dr. Faile in Utah, Florida, and in several regions of Ohio were kept informed about the effect, and attempts were made by all to replicate the original observations. The conclusion arrived at was that the transparency effect could be discerned by others and did seem to be related in its magnitude to a number of factors. If one were to evaluate the appearance of the typical viewed anomalous transparency in comparison to a known arrangement of filters or optical attenuators, one would say that it is a natural density effect and resembles an optical transmission of perhaps 2 to 3% at most. Hints of outlines or faint definition of regions of high contrast comprise most of the effect, although Dr. Faile has compiled a gallery of preferential viewing examples at his home. Some of these structures, light source combinations, have been claimed by a number of volunteers to produce almost spooky levels of seemingly real transparency. The logical question which arises here is, have these effects been captured on film? To this we answer, apparently so. Both Dr. Faile and the author have taken 35mm photos in colour and black and white around their respective lab work areas. In many of these shots, faint outlines and silhouettes which resemble those seen by the eye seem to be visible. If the whole affair is an optical illusion, some sort of imaginal ray tracing, we question if this effect would carry over to the viewing of photos. Yet on the other hand, one would think that if bright light sources such as lasers were used, anomalous transparency could be brought up to vividly and commonly observed level. Clearly this is not so. Thus we are left with a paradox. Precedence. Partial transparency of normally opaque objects, even if they are very rare, should be a topic of note and discussion in the annals of alternate science. Yet we have been able to find very little published precedent to the effect. We have viewed a recent internet post still photo taken near a ghost town in California, which seems to be, show a very transparent tombstone in the cemetery. Additionally, a very curious photograph published by Tom Bearden dates from the 1930s and shows a couple sitting on a park bench. However, the curiosity lies in the fact that one easily notices that the male of the couple is virtually invisible from the waist down. Dr. Bearden points out that the couple in the photo were sitting on a park bench under an old-fashioned arc lamp, and hypotheses that the emissions or field effects from the lamp were inducing invisibility. Tom Bearden is suggesting that an arc lamp caused emissions or field effects that induced invisibility. So, this could be the whole thing where you're kind of shifting some aspect of physical reality. Or it could be you're setting up a torsional vector in the ether, and that it's able to shift the light around an object. So if you have your arm in a particular place where the ether is spinning around it might pull the light from the object around. So if you have a vortex, say here, or let's do it like this. You've got a vortex like that going around your finger, and it's going around like that. That if there is light falling on the object here, that it's pulled round and you get to see it above. Okay? I think that might be what is going on. And in which case, this gives you an idea where the Lockheed Martin systems and methods for creating coherent matter waves allows for cloaking. They say it is one of the principles. So essentially you're trying to look at an object, but the material over which light travels is pulled round from the back. So the solidity of the object starts to wane, and you start to see objects behind it. And given the fact that radar is also light, it's a form of microwaves often, that could also be pulled round. So you might have a scenario where, depending on how the spin wave is set up, the torsion wave is set up, a radar hitting this thing could be spun round and thrown out the back, so it doesn't get reflected. So you create radar invisibility. That is cloaking. So visual cloaking and UFO says, what is this about today? I'm talking about inconvenient things. Now, the interesting thing is that something similar was observed by the guy that was spinning triangular pyramid structures through alternating magnets. And I'm trying to remember his name, but I've forgotten it right now. Maybe someone in the chat can find it. Okay. All right, so we have been told that in the fuser experiments, here, look at this. We have also been told that in fuser experiments of Farnsworth, components made of stainless steel began to exhibit transparency. Oh my. We admit that old photographs of unknown pedigree are scientifically suspect, as accidental or intentional double exposures can make people and objects look transparent. Perhaps the effect, regardless of its origin, remains obscure because few individuals think to look for it or even suspect it. Current efforts. At the present time, our main objective is to catalogue and document as many observations of apparent transparency as possible. We have considered a number of theoretical models for such a phenomenon, such as coherence of short to medium length wormhole pairs. What? Coherence of short to medium length wormhole pairs in the quantum foam of space. However, the Faile effect, as we have come to call it, requires far greater definition and characterization than exists currently. Because of this, we are actively seeking scientific correspondence and data sharing with amateur or professional scientists on this matter. Specifically, we would like to hear from any other parties who have come across anomalous transparency in their research or in even everyday life. Our opinion is that the Faile effect presents a genuine anomaly, perhaps a field of study in itself. It may extend into a number of alternate science topics and seems to bridge a gap between human optical response and perceptions and unknown physical properties. We also believe that there does exist a currently not understood factor which holds the key to the Faile effect. Understanding a control of this factor might permit dramatic technological developments. If you, the reader, have experienced anomalous transparency, or if you are working on this topic from a theoretical angle, we encourage you to contact us. Contact may be available by Nick Reiter. Well, I think we should contact him, don't you? Sorry, I didn't realise the address was there, but this is on a public forum, so this is actually literally on the internet right now. It's public, so there's the link up there for those that can read it. amaski.com/freeng letters /faile.html. Okay? I would suspect, since this is observed in the ball lightning exploding wires, and it's observed in the what is it called? Inertial confinement fuser of Farnsworth, at least around the steel metal parts where you would have orbiting structures that would set up spin waves. I think this is an etheric vortex artifact, and I think that Dr. Bearden's observation, so we have Dr. Bearden is talking to Farnsworth, is talking to this guy. So now I'm starting to get a picture. Yeah, I'm starting to get a picture that if Bearden is involved with this, then Bearden connects to Ken Shoulders, connects to John Hutchison, connects to, and in this conversation here, we've had a connection. We're starting to see the old cast of characters come out here. So now I understand why he was put in there. So there we go. Right. Now I have to do something quick, and then I will be back with you, so just bear with me. I'll just have to clean up something so someone doesn't get into trouble. And this also goes to show where you can get something that's inconvenient, and it may not be all you suspect it to be. What can I do there? Ah, it's mosquito hot sweaty season here. If you've got any questions, drop them into the chat. Damn mosquitoes. Okay, what can I do? This is tedious. Sorry, my friends. Okay, that might be enough. Okay, I think we have got this good to go. Yeah. Or not. So, some of you may have heard me, thank you very much, Vanilla Isis, that's very kind of you. Some of you may have heard me refer to Dr. Mitchell Schwartz as complaining that his patent was held up by the US Patent Office for about 10 years. This was ICCF 18 in Missouri, University of Missouri, back in, I think, 2013. Maybe 2014. Mitchell Schwartz is one person we asked for his device to verify. And in Missouri, at ICCF 18, we presented our replication and verification of Dr. Francesco Celani's work, which led to the European funding, led to the American funding, and so on. I remember sitting behind Mitchell Schwartz, and what happened was he said, "Oh yeah, you can test it. You need to pay $100,000 to get access to one little thing that's about the size of a resistor." And so we said, "Thanks, but no thanks. We're a volunteer organisation, and we're funded by very small donations, so that isn't going to fly." When we were presenting our work from replicating Francesco Celani, I was actually sitting in the row behind Mitchell Schwartz, and he turned to the person sitting next to him and goes, "Oh, I think we really should have let these guys test our device." And there was a whole conversation about regret there, and that is, you know, it's in life, when someone comes, you don't know whether it's the right thing to do. You don't know whether they're trying to steal something, and so I understand where he's coming from, but like we were genuinely just trying to help and move the science forward. And that is my sentiment really behind what I'm about to show you, because there are genuine researchers out there. And if we go back to the blog, the one that I'm referring to right now was also on the distribution list here, and it is Dr. Edmund Storms here, formerly of Los Alamos National Lab. Okay, and I was very happy to be able to ask him what he meant by electron clusters, because he was arguing in his ICCF 26 presentation that all LENR occurs because of electron clusters. And so I asked him, you know, if he could explain in more detail how the electron clusters are coming together. And he said, well, blah, blah, blah. Ken Shoulders had one idea, and he says that if we knew that, that's where the Nobel Prize lives. Okay, so in that context, I want to share this to you because this is a email from Dr. Mitchell Schwartz to the Google groups, and essentially Dr. Edmund Storms is trying to help people replicate LENR, and he's obviously run into a little bit of a challenge from Dr. Mitchell Schwartz, and this is on Monday, October the 24th, 2022 in the evening. And CMNS stands for Condensed Matter Nuclear Science, Signs of Successful Cold Fusion LANR System and Components. And this is, as far as I can understand, this is Dr. Edmund Storms. It is October the 24th, 2022. I began this thread to try and teach cold fusioneers how to successfully do cold fusion LANR. Another absolute waste of my time and effort. The same usual suspects have appeared to stop the thread, begin their ubiquitous never-ending ad hominems as they stop the cold fusion LANR engineering education and insult me. Fact, in 2003 there were many oral papers and posters given at ICCF 10. Later written papers were collected and given to the library, but were removed from Canna LENR library for years. These facts are discussed by both Eugene Malove and Dave Nagel and others in their missives. And Jed bragged about it on SPF. That it really upset Gene and Ken is obvious from their timely emails. I'm not entirely sure who this is from. Maybe that is from Mitchell Schwartz, but it's saying, mea culpa, this bragging about his own censorship, right? So Mitchell Schwartz is quoting this and quoting the fact that there was censorship, and then he's saying that it was actually Dr. Edmund Storms of the Los Alamos National Laboratory, formerly, that was bragging. And I just want to draw your attention to something here. The forum where people used to discuss LENR from the 1990s was called the Vortex-L, I think, forum. The Vortex Forum. I actually think that's quite funny. The Russians were calling it cold transmutation of nuclei and ball lightning, and the Western research groups were calling it whatever, but they were discussing it on a forum called the Vortex Forum. Which I think is quite funny. Anyway, so mea culpa. So mea culpa is Mitchell Schwartz saying, yeah, I'm having a go at you. And I think he's having a go because his patent was removed and his papers were removed from ICCF 10 in 2003. This is the same 2003 when I am led to believe that Matsumoto, when he was in the US, was brought in by some secret service and interrogated, and that the lab was in Hokkaido was interacted with, let's put it like that. And I'm hopefully saying that it's actually because John Bockris sent someone over called Lynn, and they looked at it, and that was what happened. But actually, yeah, the first part of the story doesn't add up. But something definitely was going on in 2003. Someone thought in 2003 we better start shutting down some inconvenient things. Maybe. This is my speculation. Anyway, very, very specifically in 2003, something happened. And so Mitchell Schwartz is saying, yeah, I'm calling you out. Yeah, and I guess that he was insulting Dr. Edmund Storms. And then Mitchell Schwartz goes on, the bragging about his own censorship was on Vortex, not SPF. It is presented and then discussed in detail by Dr. Eugene Malov in his entire missive from March 2004 below, M. So this is an email from the late Dr. Eugene Malov, okay? Storms, Rothwell, censorship. This is from Monday, the 29th of March, 2004. Storms, Rothwell, censorship. There we go. His email is public anyway. Sorry, Mitchell. I tried to censor it out, but anyway, his email is public. It's already in the public domain over many presentations. So, Mitch, for your information, this was a message that Rothwell posted to Vortex, as I said, the forum where everyone discussed Lena for decades, about a month ago. At lenacana.org, we have censored out some of the controversial claims related to cold fusion. That is an absolute categorical admission. Okay? By Jed Rothwell. Now, I really like Jed Rothwell. He's funny. He's built an incredible database at lenacana.org. And I have to say that he was the first $1,000 donor a few months after the MFMP were formed in 2012. He laid his money down and helped make the project happen. I remember that day I was changing trains at East Croydon Station coming down from working in the city in London, and I thought, wow, maybe we can actually make this project do something useful if we can get the kind of support by someone like Jed Rothwell. So with that said, thank you, Jed Rothwell. Such as transmuting macroscopic amounts of gold or biological transmutations, along with some of the extremely unconventional theories. i.e., if you do not agree that it's deuterium fusion, then we're going to probably knock you off the table. This is not because we, and he's specifically calling out himself, Storms and Rothwell, oppose these claims, or because we are upset by them. Just for the record, I'm not releasing something that wasn't already in a public forum. It was in the Vortex forum written by Jed Rothwell, okay? Admitting to this. This is not because we, Storms and Rothwell, oppose these claims, or because we are upset by them. It is for political reasons only. Literally, political reasons only. Because it's inconvenient. It's inconvenient. The goal of Lenacana is to convince mainstream scientists. Hopefully, I would have said that the goal of Lenacana is to actually share data of working experiments so that we can move science forward. But maybe Jed Rothwell runs Lenacana, and his idea of what Lenacana is to just mainstream scientists that cold fusion is real. This goal would be hampered by presenting such extreme views, like extremely unconventional theories. Actually, I have no opinion about most theories, and I could not care less how weird the data may seem. At the Scientific American and APS, American Physical Society, they feel hostility towards things. So the Scientific American Journal and the American Physical Society feel hostility towards alternative thinking. They have a sense that publishing such data will harm their readers. You're going to be harmed by knowledge. You're going to be harmed by words. And sully the traditions and reputation of academic science. Oh dear, poor people in academia. They have to contend with theories they've not already been told other ways to think about things. I am not a member of the congregation or at the Church of Academic Science, and I could not care less about goddesses' academia's sacred reputation. I don't publish because of politics and limited web space. He kind of contradicts himself at the end there, which is weird. And then Jean Mallow's comment is this. This is known as science by politics. It's disgusting. Storms doesn't have a leg to stand on and he knows it. The late Jean Mallow. The late Jean Mallow. Storms doesn't have a leg to stand on and he knows it. So here we go. Dr. Mitchell Schwartz is showing this. So these are the abstracts from the 10th International Conference on Cold Fusion, ICCF 10, Cambridge, Massachusetts, 24th to 29th August 2003. Proof of removal of ICCF 10 papers from 2003 still censored by Ed Storms and Jed Rothwell in 2013. Okay, some papers were restored after protest, others remain removed. Okay, so here we go. Low voltage nuclear transmutation, Ken Shoulders, page 117. Okay, so let's go to the proceedings. Okay, Ken Shoulders' paper is still missing. Ken Shoulders' paper is still missing. So we've got Storms, no Shoulders there. R to S, SH is before Storms, it's not there. And then Schwartz, there's no download. Schwartz M papers are not there. And so this is an email from Mitchell Schwartz to Ken Shoulders. Okay? Dated 22nd of August 2004. Ken Shoulders is replying to this email and he says, Mitch, I have wondered why my stuff wasn't showing on Lenacanna. I have wondered why my stuff was not showing on Lenacanna. Mitch. I have wondered why my stuff was not showing on Lenacanna. And then down here, Eugene Mallow has written, this is known science, blah, blah, blah. Also, I have always objected to the names Lenacanna as you have, Ken. So Ken Shoulders did not like the word low energy nuclear reactions and whatever canna means. Okay. Okay, so shall we find out if Ken Shoulders' papers are there today on the Lenacanna database? Given the fact that Dr. Edmund Storms is saying specifically that all Lena is reliant on electron clusters, and that Ken Shoulders described, and that was the only name of the person that he thought provided an explanation of any kind for how the electron clusters could form. Let's see if there has been a change of heart on lenacanna.org. So here we go. Here we go. I'm literally on the live site here. lenacanna.org, ICCF 10, ICCF 10 abstracts, PDF. Low voltage transmutations, page 117, Ken Shoulders. Right, let's go to, and just to show you, this is the 10th International Conference on Cold Fusion, ICCF 10. It's the same document that was pulled out by Mitchell Schwartz. And 117 down here, low voltage nuclear transmutation by Ken Shoulders. Okay, so let's go. All right, here we go. This is the live site. So I'm showing you here, page ID 728 on lenacanna.org. Ruzetsky Storms. There is no Shoulders there. Moreover, Schwartz, and Schwartz, the papers are not available to download. Still censored. Schwartz and Shoulders. Still censored. Well, my friends, what is it called, this document? Low Voltage Nuclear Transmutation by Ken Shoulders. Well, if you go to the Lenacanna database, or the Lena database on Philip Power's website, and you put in a search term for Shoulders, you can do a search and you can see here some papers by Shoulders. In fact, you can't get it from here, but my good friend Philip Power has actually got the document on there, and this is the document that was presented that you can't get access to from Lenacanna. Low voltage nuclear transmutations, work in progress. Completion expected by June 2004 if sponsor found, by Ken Shoulders. Project goals: to show nuclear transmutation using EVs operating at low voltage. Oh dear. Oh dear. If you were to show that this worked, right? If you were to show that this worked, there would be no hydrogen in there. There would be no deuterium. There would be no helium. What are you going to do to convince the mainstream physics that you're on the right path if you had these simple experiments to conduct? To present data in mass spectrometric form, to define the transmutation pathway, to provide a very low-cost mass spectrometer designed for easy construction and operation by anyone having intermediate skills. So in this document, he's literally showing how you can make a mass spectrometer. Demonstration method in brief. A sample of chosen material, such as aluminium oxide, is placed in a miniature reactor vessel that can be periodically accessed by an ion trap type of mass spectrometer. The material is reacted with, bearing in mind, this is the guy that invented the quadrupole mass spectrometer on which we find out isotopes, right? He invented it. The material is reacted with EVs generated by a spark process, allowing long EV boring type runs through the material. After a few seconds of reaction time, the material is sampled by the mass spectrometer. This sampling process requires only a fraction of a second, and then sample record is stored for later reference. The reaction is continued for several minutes with periodic sampling to determine the accumulated changes occurring in the mass spectrum as indicated by isotope shift. When a comparison with the previous samples shows that isotopes are being shifted or translated, the spectrometer is adjusted to follow the chosen peaks more closely. When the reaction is terminated after a few minutes, the operator can open the reactor chamber and remove the newly translated material for further analysis on a different type of instrument. Metal blacks. Metal blacks are sputtered powder boring. Okay, so I'm going to share this document, but basically you have a pulse generator, you create your EVOs, it goes into this ion trap mass spectrometer, the scope tells you you've got some transmutation, the high frequency generator, so on, and then you take the sample out. This is what the reactor looks like. Little spherical cavity, you have your ion exit here, which goes into your spectrometer, you have a splattered deposit and so forth, spherical pocket in ceramic. This is it. It's very simple, very simple. And here is an actual physical thing. This is what Ken Shoulders did. He was a freaking genius. He made his own devices, right? Okay? Absolute genius. Here is your splattered samples. Here is your normal nickel sample, which is your target here, your target. So this is a bit like S.V. Adamenko's work, and it's around the time that when Ken Shoulders was observing S.V. Adamenko's work. So you've basically got a big fat target of nickel, pure nickel, and you're hitting it with EVOs and you're causing a splatter around. And he's showing that near the center, you've got these fluidized pieces of nickel where your EVOs are striking, and you've got the fragments splattered onto the aluminium. The original nickel here, the parent material analysis is basically pure nickel with an extremely small signal on oxygen. The center analysis has aluminium. Of course, it's aluminium oxygen, oxide. So the oxygen goes up, the aluminium goes up, but we now have some, nickel and stuff. But he's saying here on the edge, we also have aluminium here. So this is fine. This is fine. These are all the elements we started with: nickel, oxygen, and aluminium. Now, S-Sim's analysis of the reactor final content, and you can see all of these elements coming in here. You have iron, you have titanium, you have chromium, you have calcium, you have potassium, you have silicon, you have magnesium, you have sodium, you have boron, you have lithium. Heavier and lighter elements than aluminium in this case. Nothing particularly. Oh, you got silver over here, but then the part of the reactor was coated in silver. Okay, so you've got a whole bunch of typical synthesized elements being formed. The hard way: full electronic control, hyperbolic ion trap, electrodes made, use of high vacuum pumping. So this is the stage up, and he's saying this will cost about 8,000. I think this one's a little bit cheaper. It doesn't talk about the cost on this one. But still, $8,000, many labs could do this. And so he has working drawings here. You can understand why you might want to censor this, because if this shows that it works and you're transmuting, it's not DD fusion, right? And here's this very elegant little device here. This is the mass spectrometer. He's showing you how to build a mass spectrometer. That's freaking cool. There's the EV ion source and ion trap. EV reactor. This is the actual reactor. You can see the dime down there. I think that's a dime. Okay. Here's your time of flight spectrum from the shots. Here's his apparatus. What a great loss this, losing this guy. Here's your breadboarded up control sweep, mass sweep device. Scope of photos, blah, blah, blah. So he really wanted to get this out. The easy way, manually controlling using ham transmitter. So don't bother making what he did, these complicated things which were all bespoke. Do the easy way, use a ham transmitter, high frequency source. This is starting to sound like John Hutchison here. Cylindrical ion trap spectrometer made of ceramic with metal coating. So that's what he described at the top. Rough pump, vacuum only, don't need a super duper pump. Unshielded AV ion source, don't worry about the shielding. Homemade ceramic electron multiplier, and he shows you how to make that. Cash outlay about $1,800. So he goes through here, there's the reactor and the mass spectrometer. Then this is the ion trap. He shows how to make the ion trap mass spectrometer. There we go. And this is using a ham transmitter. So there's the ham transmitter for people that don't know. It's a radio transmitter. It doesn't actually teleport ham, the meat. Okay. Here's your scope. And so on. So here, this is using titanium ion source. Okay, so you can go and look at this. I will share, this is his electron multiplier, how to make it yourself with painted on resistors. I love it, it's wonderful. And he uses this low tech, he says, lathe, very old and very cheap. Kiln, also cheap. Porcelain, casting porcelain, dirt cheap. I love it. He's trying to point out that you can actually do this and repeatedly do this for very low cost. It says inexpensive vacuum pump, and it was $210.75. That's all you needed. Make and use EV reactor spectrometers by the hundreds. This is what Ken Shoulders was trying to promote in 2004, and the paper was censored. The paper was censored. Inundate the opposition with a massive array of facts on low voltage transmutation. Inundate the opposition with a massive array of facts on low voltage transmutation. So he basically targeted the aim of the conference, which was to show a way in which you could produce a system that was very affordable, that could be distributed, that people could show transmutation. Inconveniently, it wasn't gas loading or electrolytic loading of palladium. It was just transmutation in a vacuum. A little bit inconvenient. Okay, so that being said, I have this, which I will just highlight this on page 35. This is Dr. Edmund Storm's Cold Fusion autobiography from 1989 to 2015. So, Edmund Storm's PhD. This was latest version published March the 30th, 2023. Now, if we go down here, and I think I've lost it again. What did we say? 35? Was it 35? Yeah, 35. Yeah, okay. We have an article here in his book, published in 2023, Ken Shoulders Evos. This is August 2000. Perhaps the exotic vacuum objects, EVOs, might have a role in cold fusion because they have a very, very high negative charge. This charge would be available to offset the Coulomb barrier. So he's still thinking about this offsetting of the Coulomb barrier. So you can see where his position is in 2023 regarding electron clusters. He still thinks it's offsetting the Coulomb barrier. It kind of is, but I don't think it's offsetting it in the way that he thinks it is, like charge screening. Ken Shoulders formed the EVOs by gas discharge. I wasn't set up or interested in studying gas discharges at the time. This is in August 2000. But from a purely theoretical point of view, I felt that if they could be made, their presence could initiate a nuclear reaction. So basically, he's saying, Ken Shoulders is saying, Dr. Edmund Storms is saying that in August 2000, he said if it was possible to make the things that Ken Shoulders is saying could be made, these exotic vacuum objects, then he felt that they could initiate nuclear reaction. Shoulders showed evidence of their causing nuclear reactions when they moved through a material. Shoulders would keep me appraised of what he was doing because I was one of the few people who thought his work was worthwhile. Right, I'm going to flip you to the full transcript here that I made of Ken Shoulders discussing with Nancy Lazarian and John Hutchison in 2010. Okay. I took a risk. Instead of milking the field, which I could have, I could still do it. I say no. I will be better off, and the world will be better off if I operate independently. So goodbye schools, goodbye companies, goodbye everybody. And the fact is, you were about to ask me, who would I look up to? Nancy, that's Nancy Lazarian, John Hutchison's wife. Actually, I asked about it 2 hours ago. All laugh. Ken Shoulders. I don't forget that, but you didn't get an answer because there isn't one really. I used to associate with some good old fellas. I was always the kid or the baby, and these guys were great. But now, when I go through and look at what they really did, it wasn't that great. But that was the system they were in, and they were in the academic system, obviously, so they were just being academic. Nancy, who has been non-academic that you felt has Ken Shoulders? Well, I don't mind pouring through that as a question. I will just go ahead and play bumper ball. You know, ricochet off first one wall and then another and try to find an answer to that. I'll start with a few knots. I can take the top list of everybody that I know in cold fusion, where it's at, that is supposed to be a forward-moving field. It's dead. Dead in the water. They really are bad. If I took a list of the top guys in that business or ex-business, I can name guys like Storms, McCubry, Miley. So here we go. Edmund Storms and George Miley are both quoted on that document that refers to the material that clearly became a classified patent in 1995. Now, all those and everybody of their ilk that I know well, that I have associated with closely, and when I look at what they do, I have very little admiration for it. I guess I put Storms at the top of the list of those that seemingly survived all the pitfalls and perils of being at a high echelon in the field, and that's about it on that bunch. Right, and then he has a go at the people that worked at Sparwell, and these are the people that went on to do the NASA research. And it says, the very scientific bunch doing cold fusion-like work, attributing almost everything to neutron emissions, and they don't know how to the heck to measure neutrons. They have EVOs, that's what they've got. Nancy, so they got EVOs and they don't know what they've got. They won't admit they've got them. Now guys like Makubri stand on the side with a stick poking them up saying, hey you guys, those are probably not neutrons. You ought to quit publishing that they are. You're killing your reputation. Think about this. Well, they don't. They can't. They're involved in the system. The system that said, you said this is what it was. That's a vector that points in this direction and you don't dare change the direction or you're dead. And that's true. They can't unpublish the results they've published already in any reasonable way. So basically, talking about cavitation and so forth, but he's talking about the people here that did the NASA paper ultimately. Okay, so back to Storms's account in 2023. Shoulders would keep me appraised of what he was doing because I was one of the few people who thought his work was worthwhile. There we go. Thought his work was worthwhile. He even visited my home in Santa Fe using his own helicopter. What a dude, man. When he needed gas, he would just drop down to a gas station and fill it up. When he wanted something to eat, he would land in the parking lot and go to the supermarket. Of course, that attracted attention. He would give rides because people were interested. This was a very fascinating way to travel. I didn't know this about Ken Shoulders. This is freaking cool. No wonder he was into vertical takeoff and landing when he just went around and did his shopping in a freaking helicopter. He worked at SRI and had developed a lot of instruments for them. He was independently wealthy as a result of many patents. His devices were really well designed because he had an advanced high-tech scientific background. Shoulders would periodically send a CD disc describing his work. That's how he made his information known. Unfortunately, few people were interested in what he was discovering. This is so freaking sad. So freaking sad. The same thing with Matsumoto. Just not interested. You know, the Matsumoto family went to every effort to make it possible for me to put on a fantastic show and presentation at ICCF. And his own countrymen, for the most part, could not even be bothered to show up. Just out of respect, I would expect it to happen. Shocked. Shocked. So, few people not interested. Well, a few people, because honestly, they haven't got the nous. They haven't got the nous. Or it's inconvenient. It's inconvenient because it doesn't use deuterium. It doesn't produce helium. It doesn't have the normal things in there. It's not got palladium. How are we going to get away with this? Because it has 0 palladium in it. It's got cheap stuff like, you know, titanium and aluminium oxide. Where's the money in that? Where's the moat? Where's that moat where we can prevent people coming on board with the technology that we develop? How can we separate ourselves from the heathen? Make sure that we have the technology. And I'm sorry, I asked this question of people who are working in the field. And I said, look, you know, if you're doing palladium, it's basically a moat. And really, if you get it working, it's only going to be useful for the military. And they said, well, you know, semiconductors, you know, they were using gallium and then arsenide or whatever it was, or germanium rather, sorry, germanium. And then they went on to silicon and blah, blah, blah. And I don't think that's something that quite follows, because nickel doesn't absorb hydrogen. Palladium is the most absorbing thing of hydrogen that exists. That was discovered by Thomas Graham, FRS, in 1876. Hasn't changed. It's the most absorbent, right? So you get it working for palladium, it's not going to be the same as nickel. Sorry, bad argument, sorry. Military. Good for military. Few people were interested in what he was discovering. He submitted a patent and wrote a book, but did not make the details of his discovery available to the general public. No. He submitted a patent and wrote a book. Yeah. He discovered that electrons could form an unusual type of assembly around clusters of ions. He found these clusters to be... Now, okay, he's couching this as clusters of ions because he wants to talk to his own understanding of how LENR works. So that's why he says around clusters of ions. No, not quite. They can be charged clusters and they are stabilized by ions. Okay, all right. He found these clusters to be very common in every gas discharge, by which he could make the EVOs very easily. When they passed through matter, they created a very precise hole. He was able to identify nuclear reactions on the sides of the holes. Once again, the phenomenon was rejected by conventional science because it conflicted with conventional understanding, just like LENR. So, talking about conflicted, I'm conflicted as to where the call for Ken Shoulders' work to be removed from the LENR database was in 2003. Specifically, Ken was promoting experiments in 2003 that could be conducted all over the world at very low cost, proving that exotic vacuum objects could do transmutation. 10 full years was wasted. If that document had been promoted, Ken got the message out there and didn't end up with this, but did not make the details of his discovery available to the general public. I think he's trying to do that here, actually. I think in this document he's trying to, if I read this correctly, make and use EV reactor spectrometers by the hundreds. Inundate the opposition with a massive array of facts on low voltage transmutation. I am furious. I am furious that this document was censored. 10 years in which he could have got this information out to the public. He died in obscurity. I am absolutely ragingly furious about this. Inconvenient. Politics. People might not understand it, or people might get a bit woo-wooed because they're in their ivory towers of scientific groupthink. If it's not DD fusion making tritium or helium, it's not real. It can't be real. Can't be real. Very inconvenient. Very. I am utterly beside myself. 10 fricking years he could have given. I'm asking the community to appeal to Jed Rothwell now to reinstate those papers. I'm asking Dr. Edmund Storms to demand that those papers, and if there's a recording, for it to be added to the archive. So much wasted life. So much wasted life. This was not a man who's trying to hide things from the public. This sentence does not, but did not make the details of his discovery available to the general public. These two things are not consistent. They're not consistent. And as we have shown, yes, this very day, these papers by Ken Shoulders are not available. And Jean Mallow's words here ring true. This is known as science by politics. It is disgusting. Storms doesn't have a leg to stand on, and he knows it. Furious. This is when someone trying to be helpful and well-meaning loses humanity a great opportunity. Inconvenient. All of this stuff. Thank you, Skoggy Hoggins. Yeah, Skoggy Hoggins is absolutely bang on the money. Everyone is busy doing their own thing or just trying to survive themselves. I worked at the car company research center, tried to share my enthusiasm with some of my bosses there, and they got, "That's not what we do here," responses. Yeah. We've literally had to talk about a load of dead people. But Jed Rothwell is alive. And so is Dr. Edmund Storms. I think Dr. Edmund Storms, by answering my question honestly and by his sentiment in his 2023 book, has partially atoned. I'd like to know whether it was driven by Rothwell or Storms. But I think Storms' last action at this conference, if it was partly to atone, it must have been difficult for him to answer my question, but he did. But you know, you can't give a Nobel Prize to a guy that's dead. And Ken Shoulders is dead and he worked alone. So when Edmund Storm says that is where the Nobel Prize is, okay, I will answer your questions. I will do a brief overview. So we looked at these electrode discharges here. We saw that it produces literally like a nuclear bomb going off, like this, in these things. We looked at our blog and the fact that Dr. George Miley here, mentioned by Ken Shoulders here. I've got Harold Putoff as well, of course, because they connected the two. So we've got George Miley and Edmund Storms, both referred to by Ken Shoulders. We talked about Samuel P. Faile and his where are we here? His letter to Bockris here, where he did the exploding foil, exploding wire to produce effectively ball lightning, and he called it a neutronic fusion. And he wanted to give it out to the world for peaceful purposes. And I still got more mosquitoes, which are not very peaceful. So this is something that people can replicate, but be careful as ever. He then talked about several people, but essentially came to the same conclusion that I did, that HHO was Lena in a can, or should I say a Mars gas was Lena in a can. Is that what I called it? I might have called it a Mars gas Lena in a can. Yeah, let me have a look. Probably find it from here better. No, anyway. And we looked at these transmutations, which are, none of them are helium. And we looked at this work here by Matsumoto where he saw these ring clusters decay, but also he saw this similarly sized material in hemispherical sections cut out of a nickel cathode. And that is that. And then we looked at this sequence of Gmails where two people that were censored, well, it's actually one person that's being censored, is attacking Dr. Edmund Storms for his censorship, and refers to Mallow's disgust at it and the fact that it's still not being corrected in 2013, and here we are another 12 years on from that and it's still not being corrected, and that Ken Shoulders himself was aware and was upset as to why it was not shown. Those are the actual emails of this Lena Kenner nonsense. And lastly, what did we show? That's about it, really. We showed that there was this weird transparency effect, and I think this is to do with coherent matter wave and also torsion fields. And I gave a hypothesis for why that would occur. And SP Faile was mentioned in these documents here, SP Faile. And he did these explosions of ball lightning. And that is about it, really. So that is what I would call inconvenient. So if you have a question, I will take it now. Hi Bob and all, don't really get it, but I watch when I can out of respect. Can someone respect cause somehow? I know this is for all of us. Thank you and respect. Yes, it is for all of us. Glue on soup at the Misfits Cafe. Yes, that would be great. Squirrel has said, hey Bob, don't forget to tell us about the Philadelphia experiment in the Cosmic Summit. Oh, you're going to hear my take on that. CBK Wahoo says they're giving all the prizes to warmongers, not the peacemakers. Yep, I think they are, yes. In fact, of course, you know, the Nobel Prize was by someone who made, you know, dynamite, Alfred Nobel. I was told by a friend at a birthday party earlier today about this Czech author, and I'm going to find it. They wrote this book called, the book is a Czech book. It's apparently very famous. It was written in the early part of last century, and it's called Krakatit, and it was named after Krakatoa. And you can go and look at it on Wikipedia. It's Krakatit, so Krakatit, and it was filmed in 1948 in Czechoslovakia. And essentially, the plot is this guy invents this incredible new explosive, and it starts with him in hospital with all the burns on his hands and stuff, and then he's like, you know, what do I do? Do I release this? Because it's like, you know, a huge scientific invention. And it's all about the dilemma that he faces releasing this technology that maybe can cause a lot of harm. And he basically, when it came out, it was obviously after, in the 1950s, they were saying it was like sending a message about, you know, should science invent things that just kill people, and maybe we should learn a lesson from it. So it's called Crack-A-Tit. You should check that out. It's got the same kind of message that some people might use to defend shutting stuff down. For me, one of the delights of reading and going through this little bit of research for you guys today was reading the fact that Ken Shoulders used to run around in a helicopter to do his shopping and to visit people. It's definitely... he's living the life we should all be living if various pieces of technology weren't covered up. Let's put it like that. Okay. So UFO says, have you heard anything from your sources about ongoing work of Sapphire or Orion? Yeah, they're still going, but they basically went dark after they took the information from the CIA or whatever it was, the classified documents. So the classified patents rather. So I don't know. We've got to do this ourselves, and we have to do it open. So. Squirrel says, Bob, have you ever heard of Edgar L. Hollinghead? Do you think this might have anything to do with EVOs? I don't know. I might look into it. Yes, Ken had a son who worked with him. I think it's time to reach out to Steve. I think his son's called Steve. I don't know if his son's working on it because I think all the equipment was spread to the winds. Yeah, I would like to speak to Ken's son. They did work together at the end. Okay. All right, well, I'm not good at tracking questions because there's a lot of comments. Anyway, you've had a spirited discussion, I think, tonight. Again, I remind people that I'm presenting at Cosmic Summit, although for some reason I didn't get included in the graphic, but I assume I'm still presenting. And I'm doing a workshop day with Ashton Forbes, and so I'm looking forward to that. Should be a lot of fun, and we're going to be focusing on solutions and understanding, and not dwelling on what got us to here, but on the path forward. Okay, so it's gone past midnight here, so I'm going to say good night as ever. Hi Kim, I'll see you at the summit, yes. Remember, if you haven't got your tickets, for those that are valid for discount, then or there is a $25 referral fee if you book under the name Tesla with the discount code or the referral fee Tesla. I don't know. I'm just telling you, telling you what I know. There's nothing to track it from my end. Okay, so this was inconvenient. Not to me, although I did feel a little bit angered by the fact that we lost 10 years of one of the most brilliant people to have ever walked the earth, sharing his ideas and making it possible for people around the world to know that essentially controlled nuclear synthesis is possible in very much more simple apparatus than is now classified, as far as I can work out, and part of the Brookhaven National Laboratory / American Fusion Research Program, that is to say the SV Adamenko lab, Proton 21. Yeah. Inconvenient. So let's just cover it up. Hope it goes away. Sorry, not gonna happen. Buenas noches, dobry noc. Good night.